Happy New Year and welcome back to Radio Juxtapoz. My name is Doug Gillen. Today I'm in conversation with sculptor, performance artist, part man, part clay, William Cobbing. So the new year is here and we are back with a jacked roster of artists and interviews to help ease you guys through the winter months that lay ahead. Before we get into it, I just want to say thanks to every single one of you that listened in 2023. The support from each and every one of you really does mean a lot. And we absolutely love hearing from you, finding out where you're listening in from. And we are itching to get cracking on a really, really big year ahead. If this is your first time listening, welcome and thank you for joining us. Consider Radio Juxtapoz a somewhat relatively regular fixture for all things in emerging contemporary art. If you do enjoy this interview, or even better if you enjoy the whole channel, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'll be completely honest with you, we've never been great at sticking to the sort of regular time slot, so subscribing is the best way to make sure you don't miss anything. And of course, you can follow us over on Instagram at Radio Juxtapoz. If you're feeling extra generous, why not drop us a couple of words in a review from whatever platform you happen to be listening in from. At the tail end of last year, I paid a visit to the studio of clay enthusiast William Cobbing. Even if you don't realise it, there is actually a strong chance you might have seen William's work, well, at least one aspect of his work on social media. His performative short video clips in which characters don large-scale clay heads attract serious numbers on Instagram, Twitter and TikTok. One of his first video performances from 2004, The Kiss, featured two conjoined clay-clad characters intimately touching each other with this full-scale ASMR assault accompaniment. And even as I was watching it back today, it's an almost overwhelming experience on the senses. This came out way before online ASMR was even a thing. Frenetic hand grabs, the rubbing of fabrics, the squelching of the moist clay, and those sort of like wispy breaths underneath make for this really unsettled watch that feels almost as suffocating as it does sensual. In others, cheese wire is used to gradually remove layers of this large clay structure, revealing chambers of colourful paint which start to pour out. Clay becomes a vehicle to explore our connections to ourselves, with each other, and with the earth. In an extension to this practice, actually it's probably the other way round, William works with clay in more traditional ways as a ceramicist, in a field that's taken him to Amsterdam, Rome, Milan, and even Kabul. But today, it finds him at his studio in South London. Let's get into it right here, right now, with William Cobbing on Radio Juxtapoz. I guess let's start with where we are. Describe this current environment.
Welcome to my new studio. I've literally moved in a couple of weeks ago, and I haven't made new work in here, and it's just a case of putting stuff so it's available for me to make new work.
What kind of environment do you usually like to be in when you're creating?
Well, I've got two environments. So I've got this sort of a bigger studio, which is where I make my messy clay videos. And then at home, I've got a smaller room where I make my smaller ceramic works, and I've got a kiln out the back in my garden. So yeah, this tends to be the kind of more chaotic, energetic performance space.
So there's, I guess, a couple of different strands to your artistic identity. Then there's that performance side, and then the kind of more, I guess, the more formal, traditional side of a ceramicist. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I make even my ceramics. I wouldn't kind of bracket as traditional. So I use sort of some kind of traditional glazes, like a kind of Chinese celadon glaze, or an oxblood or something like that. But I've never been trained in ceramics, and I sort of approach it from the wrong way somehow.
Go on.
Well, in the sort of sense of I trained in fine art and in sculpture, and my kind of sculptural ceramic objects come from performance. So they're almost like kind of versions of the things I do mediated into an object. So a kind of a moment of performance kind of stopped in a sculpture. But you're right in the sense of I'm entering into a kind of traditional dialogue. Certainly, yeah.
Where did that I mean, and we're kind of jumping straight in here, but where did that element of performance then come in to a traditional practice?
Yeah, so I've just been playing back a recorded interview with a really good ceramic artist called Claire Toomey. And we did a show at Tate Liverpool called A Secret History of Clay in 2004. And Claire had a performative work and I had a performative work. So it was my first kind of clay head. And it happened kind of by accident, which is I was studying in Amsterdam, doing a master's course at Ateliers. And I was mainly making sculptures. And I just, I kind of one day, in response to, it was actually an image I'd seen of the filmmaker David Lynch, where he'd got a little toy policeman and put chewing gum on the policeman's head and then had ants crawling over the chewing gum on the toy policeman's head. And that just kind of weirdly, I didn't really think much of it. And the next thing I knew, I was putting clay on my head and thinking, what the hell am I doing? So it was a kind of moment of kind of cognitive dissonance or something. It's like, oh, no, I do sculptures. And it's like, yeah, but I'm putting clay on my head and modeling it. I don't understand.
Did it feel like a natural fit then that first time? Or
No, not at all. It felt really weird and it felt really wrong. And then I kind of made a sort of cassette video of it, because this was back in about like 2000 or 2001 or something. And I sort of forgot about it. It's one of those works I sort of filed elsewhere and carried on making the sculpture. But it kind of held a really weird fascination or sort of compulsion. So I sort of did eventually return to it and then thought, yeah, this actually, maybe there's something here. But so I think sometimes when you have big changes in the way you work, it takes a while for it to kind of percolate through.
What was really in that early moment, what was driving you to do that, to push away into this space?
Yeah, I mean, what do you mean, into a performance space?
Yeah, well, just, for lack of it, what made you stick clay on your head?
Yeah, I can't rationalize it.
I'm trying to make it sound a bit fancier than that, but if we have to.
I guess it was about the primitive engagement in material. So it's literally about it's about the raw materiality of clay. So rather than a nice kind of finished ceramic, it's always about the unfinished, unformed clay. But again, I think the idea that you can explain a lot of what you do as an artist isn't true. And so I can't necessarily explain that, other than I kind of really like doing it. And I also thought I like the results in a way. So there's a dichotomy between, it's very sort of kind of meditative when I have kind of clay on my head. And then also when you see it, I think it's got something where, in terms of, it has something intriguing about it. It has something kind of sensual about it. It's got something which is really intriguing. I think it was quite new, I suppose. And then I think when you see something new, or when you make something new, there's a little bit of I don't know. It takes a process of getting used to it.
A little unease.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, totally. A bit of unease, a bit of intrigue, a bit of kind of fear, maybe. But then maybe when you absorb that and reflect on it, you think, well, actually, maybe that fear or trepidation was kind of trying to tell me something in a way. I think sometimes works of art that I think are good, that I've done, often I feel quite conflicted about them. So I don't know. The last work I made for Stoke, which is a big clay mobile phone on a big clay hand, for a few weeks after I'd had the idea, I was like, oh my God, is this really bad? Or is it sort of something that's really interesting, and will it kind of work? And I felt it was teetering on the brink of being really good or being really terrible.
I guess it's probably quite hard to pinpoint what separates these two, but what was it that was making you think that there was, I guess, something that Yeah, well, your words. What was making you think it was bad?
I mean, again, because it was something quite new. There's always a really big gap between. When I have ideas, I always sketch them sketch them as drawings. With this one, I went straight. I just kind of went like, screw it. I'm just going to start I think that in a way, the acid test is you start making it. And I started making it, and I kind of thought, oh, actually, no, I'm beginning to really like this. And so it was the act of making and getting involved with the material. It's the only way to kind of form a sort of judgment over it. And it felt right, I suppose, quite intuitively. It was like, okay, I'm really enjoying making this. I kind of like how it's going. I think it was the case of just diving in. I think it happens a lot with artists is you can have an idea and then kind of freeze sometimes. And there's that sort of moment of keeping it at the idea stage and kind of preempting a sense of, is this going to work or isn't this going to work? You've just got to try it.
It's quite a large scale clay piece to start on a whim.
Yeah, exactly. No, so that was probably my hesitation, because it was like, this is a commitment. Yeah. I mean, this is going to be a big work. It's going to then require quite a lot of AV stuff, because I've got to house a big flat screen TV. I've got to make a casing for it. I've got to. It was demanding. I think I probably, as I was making it, thinking I can maybe turn back after a few days, or I could just leave it and bin it.
What is it about that kind of rough finish that you really like about your sculptures?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm glad you picked up on that. I want this sense of kind of a work in the stage of kind of metamorphosis or uncompletion. And then in that sense, it's a sort of formative idea of clay. It's the idea of the gooey, oozy, haptic materiality of it. And then as soon as you sort of smooth it off and glaze it, it then becomes a kind of a monument or something. It becomes kind of defined. And so I quite like the idea of it looking a bit unfinished, because then it links to the performances I do where stuff never really finishes. So with the videos, often something is happening and you can just loop 5 minutes of footage, and this poor person who's engaging with clay is just carrying on, sort of is stuck in a kind of Sisyphean loop.
Are you conscious about the kind of that real history of clay and the fact that this could effectively, the same tools that you're using, the same materials, this could fit into just about anywhere in time?
Yeah. Again, it's the thing that I love most. It's a really kind of primeval, I mean, it kind of predates us. Mm-hmm. It has got, so I know, in the sense of sort of our earliest forms of communication in kind of cuneiform kind of clay tablets, it's called in that, and the idea of materiality and clay sort of still evidencing that is really sort of interesting for me. And also the fact that compared with other materials, it's cheap, it's throwaway, it's much less of a kind of precious sort of, kind of material.
So you're like an anti-Hearst.
In what way?
He's using the most expensive diamonds in the world.
Oh my God, yes. But I mean, the thing about that Hearst, I guess you're talking about the skull with the diamonds. Yeah. It's all sort of carbon in materials. That is a friggin' ancient sculpture. And then I know the diamonds, millennia. But then the clay also has that. It's just a question of kind of value judgment, and somehow.
I know your mother was a potter. Is a potter?
Well, no, my mum was a probation officer.
Oh right, no, that is like I fucked up there. What did I read?
So she was a probation officer, but in her spare time, she did a lot of it's a kind of really good, really involved hobby.
Okay.
Yeah, but so was a potter, and made absolutely beautiful kind of utilitarian kind of pots and cups and things like that. And so I hung out a bit with my mum when she was doing that.
I assume that's where the interest in this material came from, or was it?
I don't know.
Or did it disappear, or was it?
Yeah, no. So it did. Yeah. So probably my mum did a lot of pottery between the age of about when I was a little kid, so 6 or 7, So I was about 10, 11. She had a kind of really big phase of doing it. So I sort of hung out in my mum's little pottery and made stuff. And yeah, I left pottery or clay. I did a bit at St. Martin's when I did sculpture. And I made a few sculptures in ceramic. And then the performance started, on my kind of masters. But yeah, I know I have my mum to thank for that initial exposure to clay. But it's also the thing, I mean, most kids have a kind of experience of clay, like at school or something like that. So for example, the show I've just done in Stoke, there's a great project in Stoke called the Portland Inn Project, and I did a clay workshop for kids who were that sort of age that I was when I started working with clay. And it's obviously just a fabulous material. Whatever your age or skill set, you're going to find some engagement in it. You don't have to be skilled. It's quite sort of democratic. Like, whereas, say, if you got out a kind of a lump of steel or something and said, "Could you weld that to a 6-year-old?" They're gonna kind of look at you like, "What the hell?" But you give a 6-year-old a lump of clay, and they're going to be able to figure something out, because it's sort of easy, but then at the same time, you have master kind of potters who spend their whole life trying to perfect a bowl, or they try and perfect a glaze mix or something. So I did a residency at the European Ceramics Centre, and the glaze master there said, her predecessor on retiring said, "Look, I really need 2 more lives to kind of like get the hang of glazes, because I feel I'm at the beginning of this process." Kind of direct engagement and not knowing anything, but it's also totally compulsive for kind of reaching a sort of expertise as well. You carry on going forever.
Let me try and phrase this as diplomatically as I can. When you were in Central St. Martin's and you were working with ceramics, working with clay, was that encouraged, or was it seen in some way as just more of a craft rather than something that would be accepted within the realms of fine art? And is that something that concerns you today? Is there a battle between these two worlds, the world of ceramics craft and the world of fine art institutions?
Yeah, I think for some people there really is a divide. It's not something that bothers me at all. I guess I was quite lucky at St. Martin's. I don't think, well, actually one of our tutors was really into ceramics, but as a kind of a sculpture form. So in a way, maybe I was lucky, or it was fortuitous that I never really had to sort of think about that. But I do know that I'm really aware of those sorts of issues, but I think you can either choose to engage with them or not. I'm very much in the fine art realm. For example, one of the videos I made for a show in MIMA, which is Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art, about 6 or 7 years ago, I screened a clay video, which is definitely an artwork. But then I made these ceramic stools, which are kind of shaped like barrels, and it's a traditional Japanese design. And that's a bit of craft. It's a utilitarian thing. You sit on these ceramic stools, and then you can watch my video.
How easy was it to make that jump then? Did it feel like it was an organic thing for you? You know, you're not coming in and doing figurative portraits, and which feels like, oh, this is safe. You're coming in doing something a little bit left field. Did it feel organic that it just started to happen for you? Or were you in your head while you were at Central St. Martin's going, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to have to get a fucking real job after this?
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good question. I don't know. I've always sort of known the kind of, I suppose sort of financial, practical limitations and career limitations of what I do. So weirdly, I think when I was at St. Martin's, I maybe put a bit too much pressure on myself I kind of thought, yeah, I'll graduate from here and I'll be like 21 and I need to be sort of ready for the world and to be exhibiting and stuff. And it actually meant that I kind of wasn't really happy with the work. It just got a bit sort of, it was quite sort of conservative. I kind of then came around to the idea of thinking, well, look, just pursue it, go for the MA. So that was in Holland. And I've always had to base my choices on, kind of practicalities in terms of things like the postgrad in Amsterdam was subsidised. The Dutch have got a really good they treat artists really well, and art students really well in comparison to the UK, which is just kind of cut to the bone.
Fighting for your life on that one.
Yeah, really. Yeah, absolutely. And so switching to Holland meant that was a kind of practical choice. That was in a way about survival, because I'd been offered a place at the Slade and for an MA, and I would have had to have paid for that. And it was like, well, I can't afford this. So I just couldn't do it. So Holland offered me a lifeline in that sense. I don't know, I've always had kind of like odd jobs, like working on building sites, working in bookstores, and then more regularly for the last 15 years teaching part-time. I've always had to kind of balance my desire to be an artist with kind of the practical world of it, earning a crust to sort of survive. I've often veered away from being a kind of trying to be a successful commercial artist, because I know that has limitations. So what it means is in the studio I sort of do what I want. I
saw you did that collab with Maison Margiela.
Yeah.
I guess, how did that come together, and was that commercial side of things something that you were actively seeking, and is it something that you're welcoming with open arms? Because it looked great.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I was really happy with that. And it was LNCC in collaborate. LNCC are the company who are a fashion platform, and they work with Maison Margiela. They wanted a kind of a video to go with that, and they'd seen my work. So with Maison Margiela, as you probably know, a lot of his stuff was about, kind of like paint drips and like, really kind of quite far out there fashion. And so it really fitted with what I did. And they approached me in a really good way, which was, we really like your work. We just want to give you some Maison Margiela clothes, and you do your thing with clay and performance. And we'll give you some money.
The important part there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, but they never, they gave me total carte blanche. I could do what I wanted. It was hilarious though, when tens of thousands of pounds worth of Margiela beautiful bits of clothing turned up at my studio. And I said to them, the thing I really want is the lab coats. So that's the thing, in a way, that's one of the most iconic things about Margiela. And also I like conceptually the idea of the lab coat being everyone in the fashion house wears the lab coat. It's the idea of sort of fraternity, the idea that they're all, kind of anonymizing or something like that. And what I try to do with my clay videos is the clay anonymizes the person. And something about the Margiela, which is the lab coat, it creates this kind of shared identity. So there was a lot that I kind of wanted to sort of explore with that. But I sometimes get approached and it's just really not what I want to do.
So I guess that's a good example of something that you were really interested in. So what would the project, just for anyone that's going to approach you after this, what would a project that what wouldn't interest you about a commercial gig like that?
I think it was if I'm not, I really need to be given some sort of freedom, and I want to kind of impose or to have my sensibility. I want to sort of express that in a way. I mean, I wouldn't, and if the ethics of a company who'd approached me I didn't like, I wouldn't go for it either. Sure. I mean, I also, in terms of what you were saying about art and craft, I do like that idea of that. For me, that was just a really nice crossover between fine art and fashion. Mm-hmm. So I really liked, there was something I was really sort of interesting about that. And obviously at St. Martin's, I'd studied sculpture on Charing Cross, was in the basement on the ground floor, and fashion was on the first and second floor. So there's
a synergy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a sort of synergy, and the fine artists were all a bit jealous because St. Martin's was just getting much better known for its fashion as well.
Was that idea that you ended up doing for Margiela, was that something that you had already been working with? Was that idea already in the pipes? Not necessarily the lab coats, but this, because just to visually kind of describe what you're looking at, it's two characters and they seem to be kind of connected through this I don't know what word you would use, but let's just call it a sort of tube of clay.
Yeah.
Was that concept something that was already in your head that you had wanted to bring out, or was this literally just the kind of the opportunity had managed to develop this itself?
Yeah, I think it was something to do with when they had approached me. I gravitated toward the lab coats because a lot of what I do is thinking about the idea of how my works link to bits of clothing. And there's something really nice about the lab coat, which it's got effectively a kind of a division down the middle, which then effectively allowed for this kind of tube, this sort of weird gloopy tube. It's almost a sort of Siamese twin kind of connection between these two figures. But the lab coat allowed that, and it's one of, like, you'd have to have effectively a sort of a long jacket or a lab coat or something. But the lab coat was good just because it's sort of super minimal. There's no logo on it. It's like, it was something that really, in that sense, it was what a collaboration can do to take you beyond what you normally do. Because there's no way I would have, it allowed me, I suppose it's sort of, sometimes these collaborations give you a bit of a jolt. It takes you out of your kind of normal way of working and stuff like that. So this sort of allowed that kind of, allowed for that. So it was really nice.
I don't know if this is accurate and if you agree with it, but it feels like, I guess looking through your Instagram, it felt like there was a change from that more destructive component into something that felt more, it had a bit more of a sense of a longing for human connection in it.
Yeah.
Looking at it and seeing a longing for human connection, there was quite a big shared experience in which we were all longing for human connection recently. And I wonder to what extent that global pandemic may have had in triggering this change.
Yeah, you've kind of really nailed it. So it's exactly what I was doing. In a way, it's to go back to March 2020. And a lot of my videos, so maybe the video I'm most known for is called The Kiss, and it's two figures joined together by the head, and there's a kind of a connection between them. And it's a kind of a pastiche of a kiss, so it's kind of repulsive but sensual. It's sort of, this kind of this dichotomy. But and until March 2020, I often worked with, I worked with a camera operator and a couple of performers, an assistant, and it would be a collective thing, and it would be about this exchange and like 2 or 3 people or whatever together performing together, and then going into my studio in March 2020, and we all so this is a studio block in Hackney Wick, my former studio, and we were like terrified in the sense of, in terms of the world turning upside down, but also thinking, are they going to padlock our studio? What's going to happen? Like, what on earth is going on? And my neighbour was just going, yeah, Will, do you want to come to the pub? There's just one night before the pub kind of like closes before lockdown. And I was like, I don't really want to go to the pub. I was sort of worried about my studio. And in the end, we were able to go to our studio. And so, but then because of social distancing and blah, blah, the camera operator I normally work with is no chance of any other performers. You've got to be on your own. And then that led to effectively me putting my tripod and camera in the corner of the studio, flipping the window around, watching what is happening in the camera window and filming myself with a single lump of clay on my head. And that's when I started doing the ones where I use a wire cutter and then the paint kind of oozes out. So that was really, I think at the time I wasn't thinking, oh no, I wasn't reflecting. I think so much of art, or the art I do, is quite impulsive and responding to a certain sort of practical situation. So, of course, it was then about isolation, but I wasn't computing that. I wasn't necessarily thinking, I want to do something which is about isolation. It was more that, you naturally make art in terms of the times that you exist in. And so this was, I'm totally alone. So many of us are totally alone. We see each other over a Zoom call. That's what, being introduced to that. So yeah, during that period, I just almost had a diary of single clay heads for about a year or so. And then the Margiela thing came at the end of that period. And so it was naturally a time in which I could think, okay, I can get my camera operator back in and I can get a gang back in. And so it was a bit like, well, hey, we're slowly moving towards getting back to some kind of our reality. And yeah, so it in a way, it was quite sort of celebratory in that sense. I was really happy to be working with other people again, and that was really the first thing.
What are some of the advantages or disadvantages or quirks even of using clay to convey human emotion?
I think it's brilliant. I think it's such an emotional material. I think it's really it's kind of the body. It's like flesh. It's it's really tactile, haptic, and yeah, I think it. I mean, I don't think it's a sort of an emotional material kind of per se. I think what I try and do is dramatize that. Some of it's quite slapstick, so some of it's quite linked to something like the scene in Ghost with Debbie Moore and Patrick Swayze.
I almost half expected a picture of that when I walked in.
Yeah. There's a lot of sensual, slapstick, humorous, smutty, weird kind of stuff that that the material kind of brings out. It's a kind of conduit for those sorts of emotions, I think.
It's funny that you say that, because when I remember the first time, I think it was actually the one that you talked about there, the one with the cheese wire kind of like pulling down to reveal the paint face. My initial thought was that this is going to go down a more almost nihilistic route, a kind of a dark David Lynchian side where you start to get pulled into that really the darker side of performance art, and then it kind of subverted that slightly when you start to see these big, bright, colourful, smiley face looking at you. Are you consciously trying to avoid going down a more nihilistic path with your work? Because I think with clay, it could really easily do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. An artist friend of mine, Jeanette Thomas, we were once talking about the idea of where my work doesn't go into kind of horror somehow. Which is, I sometimes try to sort of underplay the drama. And so that's where the humour comes into it. It's sort of slapstick. And I want it to sort of feel more relatable in the sense of kind of, I would hope that just anyone could think, oh yeah, I can imagine having kind of clay on my head. And they've just got T-shirts on and they're wearing trainers. And it's very sort of lo-fi and kind of just normal sort of behaviour, which I hope sort of draws attention to the fact that it's just a bit, that adds to the kind of weirdness of it. So I don't want to push the horror, but the fact that you even talk about that, the work where I'm pulling away the clay and paint spews out in the kind of realm of horror, it's the closest I've got. And after those were posted on Instagram, they then started appearing all over TikTok, where a rumour started.
I was going to ask about this because it's everywhere.
It is. It's everywhere. So, but do you know the rumour though? The rumour, which is, I died from. I'm called Clayman, and I'm from the dark web, and I've died through having just clay on my head and not breathing, and so. Some kid ripped me off on TikTok, so I actually had to open a TikTok account, and I put a few of my videos almost as a way of kind of reclaiming a space or something. But then I just had, again, all these TikTok kids commenting, going, you're not Mr. Clayhead, he's dead and he's from the dark web. And I'd kind of almost taking the piss, kind of like, no, I'm not. I'm okay. I'm all right. And they were going, no, you're lying. You're like this. And no, you're an imposter. You're fake. Show us some evidence or something like that. And it's just really funny.
Do you know the origins of it? Do you know what triggered it? And what does from the dark web mean? He exists next to the part where you buy drugs?
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. No, I know. I don't understand any. I mean, with each new social media platform, the older you get, the more you think, the more detached you get from it. So going into the world of TikTok was just really weird, and it was just like, I don't understand any of this at all. So I still don't. So I don't know how the rumor started, but I guess it's like anything. It's the sort of plague of social media, which is once a sort of it catches fire. And then I was suddenly watching videos of me with this kind of soundtrack, this kind of horror soundtrack that they'd added, and they kind of remixed it, and then they kind of added sort of weird like special effects onto my clay head, and it made it look really evil and horrible. And I was like, oh my God, this is what's going on? What's going on with this? And so, but by that stage, the cat is out of the bag, and you've lost control over it. But it was funny and terrifying at the same time to see what had happened.
When you talk about humour in your work, and I've asked a couple of artists recently who have been involved using humour in their work, performance art particularly. The fine art world doesn't necessarily embrace humour with open arms traditionally. And I wonder with your work, when you're watching your performance and you're not kind of given the green light to laugh, you don't know how to react, because you're sitting there and you're like, this is serious art. It's art. I'm in an institution. If I'm laughing at the artist, not with them. Doing something so kind of on that line, do you have to kind of openly acknowledge the humor so that people feel that it's okay to take it serious, to not take it so seriously?
I don't know. I've never been sort of shy about the humour in my work. I don't set out to sort of be kind of really sort of funny, but I just know it's a kind of byproduct of what I hope that my work is a bit nuanced. So there's a bit of sort of slapstick humour, like slapstick deadpan humour. I'm quite kind of busy with that idea of where humour hits physical objects, and it's the slipping over like the banana skin. It's the Buster Keaton. It comes from that. It's that that genealogy of artists who have done that, or performers who have done that over time. One really nice thing about this show I've just done in Stoke-on-Trent is the Glenn, who runs the space, kept little postcards with comments on, and I was just really heartened by the fact that a lot of people had taken the time to write a little response and to describe their emotions about seeing the work. It was quite moving, and it was really nice, because again, it's not it was quite sort of a kind of like a direct reaction to it, and a lot of people picked up on the humour. So I'm not sure I needed to explain it. I genuinely want my work to be quite sort of kind of direct, in the sense of, I think it's probably why it does quite well online. The fact that you don't have to have an art education, you don't have to kind of read theory books to sort of understand my work, and you can have a really sort of direct sort of response to it, and that the humour is sort of is that as well. And I am really serious. I'm sort of serious about the work. You can't laugh. Yeah. Really serious, so serious about the work, and I do read books. I do really want the work to have that really, I want it to have a direct line to someone's funny bone, or for them to feel that sort of sensuality, and I want it to sort of have that kind of direct effect, which is an effect beyond language. It's one of just sort of provoking an emotion somehow, and that's laughing, or kind of just feeling. Again, on these cards from the people who'd seen the show in Stoke, a lot of them found it really gross as well, but they tended to say, but in a good way, we like things that are, this is great gross.
When you're kind of conceptualizing these, particularly with these touching ones, these kind of just almost randomly caressing the clay, do you find yourself having to kind of art direct the movements to make sure that it sits in that balance of not being too sexual or sensual, also funny, also weird, and what does that kind of look like?
Yeah. It is quite funny. It's sometimes about me, when a performer is covered in clay, it's almost kind of moving hands and kind of going a bit more like this, a bit more. And so it's often about the idea of sort of prodding. It's this sort of prodding kind of motion, as opposed to this sort of voluptuous kind of I don't know, sort of swooshing across the clay or something. So it's not, I don't want to totally ham it up. It is quite sort of poised in terms of movement, and equally I don't want it to be sort of too sort of aggressive. It's the idea, I suppose one way of saying it is, there's something about it which is an idea of kind of a process of sort of discovery or self-discovery, in the sort of sense of these clay figures, they can't see, so they're using their hands as kind of eyes. So it's trying to convey that sense of what you're doing is you're finding out about the person that you're kind of modelling in a way. So maybe it's something to do with that.
Where is the starting point for one of these?
I do a lot of drawing. I do a lot of thinking in terms of drawing. So I've got sort of hundreds and hundreds of pages of just ideas where I just really quickly do a kind of like a still of a scenario, and the performances are always, like a lot of my sculptures, they're quite sort of frontally arranged. So in that sense, I can make a drawing of how it should look, and then thinking of the idea of I'm looking at a bit of paper in the same way that we look at a TV screen. So we're looking at it frontally. So a drawing can sort of move over to a moving image screen, sort of quite kind of not seamlessly, but there's a sort of a link. And in terms of where the ideas come from, it's from anywhere. It's I take a lot of my cues from watching films, stuff I see online, but also kind of I mean it comes from anywhere in that kind of sense.
Mm-hmm. Are you thinking about an emotion or something that you're trying to convey first, or is it just, are you thinking more in terms of like that logistical physicality of how that will look on a screen or on a page?
Yeah, I love logistical physicality. I like that one.
Cool, you can have it.
It's both. It's logistical physicality, and it's some sort of sensual. It's some sort of sensual thing. And obviously, I mean, I was just at just Freeze a month or so ago, and Bryony Furr and Rachel Whiteread were having a really interesting conversation, where Rachel Whiteread was talking about the job of a sort of sculptor is often solving practical problems, which is what I'm doing. But there's a real joy in that, in kind of making and problem solving and stuff like that. So a lot of it is about that, and a lot of it is, wow, wouldn't it be great if I made sort of 3 people standing on each other's heads and they all have clay, and like, how the hell do I do that? And there's a sort of an excitement in that. But then obviously behind that there is a sort of sense of I'm trying to sort of be aware of the kind of the emotional conflict, and the materiality, the sculpture, is sort of so important that that sort of emotion comes from that, and our reaction to it in that sort of sense of clay is a material that it's sensual and sort of a bit gross and disgusting, and so that we already have an emotion. We already have a kind of an emotional kind of link, like sort of weird, ancient emotional response to sort of clay. It's the stuff in the ground. It's shit. It's like this sort of stuff. We experience, and it's also partly about the idea of material displacement. So clay in the ground, earth in the ground is fine. But as soon as you bring it inside and put it on that's the thing about the Margiela. It's like, yeah, these are such expensive clothes, and I'm putting clay on them. And that's impolite, and it's there's sort of something about confounding people's expectations of where the clay should be, in a way that might cause the sort of emotional sort of response as well. I kind of want people to sort of sometimes feel a bit annoyed or pissed off or triggered by the work, but then I also want to sort of win them over with the sort of sensuality. I want them to have those different feelings, and then maybe to feel a bit conflicted.
I like that. That sounds like no easy task, trying to get so many different multiple ways to pull people in so many different directions.
Yeah, just very quickly, that in a way, that for me that's super important. I want my viewer, I want people to see my. I don't want to give them easy answers. I want them to work a bit, and I think sometimes in the sense of watching a film or listening to music, some of the things that you have to work a bit to kind of to appreciate, or to sort of, I know you might have to watch things a couple of times or something, or you might have a reaction. I think it's really good to kind of put your viewer on a bit of a kind of exercise regime.
This is a question I'm not asked. I definitely haven't planned, but I'm going to ask it and see where it goes. You just mentioned that if your art was music, what music would it be?
Oh, right. God, that's a good... From being a teenager, a kind of a real musical thing that kind of... that was really just blew me away was one of the Pixies' first albums. So I think it was Doolittle. Do you know that one?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, so...
Don't ask me to start listing out the tracks, though.
So I loved the sort of abjectness, the earthiness of it. One of the songs is called "Gouge Away." You can gouge away, stay all day if you want to. There's something about maybe that kind of. I mean, it sort of predated grunge and Nirvana. I know it came out of the 80s. I kind of grew up on it, and so. For example, something like Pixies would be a good early, the sense of the real, like, it's visceral. Wow, I haven't really thought about this. It's such a good question. All their songs are really short. It's like all the songs are 2.5 minutes long, or something like that. They don't kind of muck about, and it's what I've enjoyed doing with my video, particularly more recently, is just let the video do what the video is going to do, and then just stop the camera. It's a sort of quick blast of intensity. You feel kind of blown away by a Pixies song, and then it's finished, and then it's the next song, and it's like, oh no, shit, and that next song's taking them in a kind of totally different direction. You mentioned Rachel Whiteread earlier, and I'm interested in trying to. Before I got here, I was trying to pin where you are. You know, it's that kind of like that part sculptor, part performance artist. Who are your contemporaries and your peers at the moment? Like, where in the lineage are you currently sitting, and who else is in the pool with you? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, clay has become, as you'll know, as we all sort of know, clay has sort of become pretty sort of ubiquitous and more kind of influential as a material, I know, over the last sort of decade or something like that. So there are lots of artists who are sort of working in that way. I know someone like Florence Peake does really brilliant clay videos and performances. Someone like Claire Toomey, again, works really in a really good way between kind of ceramic and like kind of performance. So they're really sort of direct, and I know them both, and I've done shows with them, and it's great sort of talking to them. And then maybe artists who I don't know. There is a super show at the moment. Is it still on? Yeah, it's still on. Nicole Eisenman, the Whitechapel Gallery. So, but I came across her work. A friend of mine and I went to Münster, the sculpture thing in Germany. In Kassel about 5 or 6 years ago, and Nicole Eisenman had these it's sculptures just dotted around this town in Germany, and it's a real mecca, and it's just often really exciting, groundbreaking work. So, but Nicole Eisenman had these 5 figures around a kind of a pond in a kind of just a municipal park. They were just these kind of huge, glorious figures, like kind of lounging by the pool, and like holding cans of beer with kind of weird fountains coming out of their chest. They were quite sort of androgynous. They were sort of half naked. They were really weird. They had kind of grotesque noses and sort of distorted features. And I remember thinking, oh my God, what the hell is this? It's so good. But it's also so, I think for me, it kind of added to a sense of a return to some really good figurative sculpture that you might also see in artists like Huma Barber or Mark Manders. I know sort of several artists who are working in quite a kind of rough, gloopy way with kind of sculpture and figures. Yeah, somehow.
for many people, they'll have seen you as, you know, the Instagram guy, the clay head guy, you know, the guy that died. And that sits somewhere in the realm of those short viral video performances, of which there's, you know, no shortage now. And it goes from anything from the guy that does those kind of like Joe's Machines, who does those weird DIY kind of crap contraptions, and into something, you know, that you see as like, hey, this is my life and I'm taking my practice seriously. Is there conflict between the way that social media persona or response meets the more serious side of where you are? Yeah, it is. I think it's because it's still sort of in progress, and my understanding of it, engagement of say particularly Instagram, is still in progress. I guess one of the things since the pandemic and having loads of shows postponed or cancelled around that time meant that I was thrown back on Instagram like a lot of artists. So that's probably where I really started throwing a lot of videos at that. And I think it's got good, there's good stuff and there's bad stuff about it. So I think one of the things about Instagram or online art that I think is really good is that engagement in art is often defined by our backgrounds and our kind of our class or our art education or something like that. A lot of people just don't go to galleries or museums. And I know there's a sort of etiquette and there's a sort of sense of sort of barriers and what have you. There's something about Instagram which I think is brilliant in the sense of it's turned everyone into thinking visually. And everyone thinks about framing a photo or framing a video. And it's that sort of it's the whole Warhol thing. Like he did what he predicted came to pass, which was all going to be famous for 15 minutes or something like that. So there's something really nice, I think, about the democracy of that. But then at the same time, I think with something like Instagram, and I'm a bit aware of this as well, is you can, I think it's sort of, but it's also prevalent in the art world as well, is Instagram really, what it does is it turns what you do into a product, and it encourages you to do it again and again in a sort of a similar way. And I was slightly aware of being sucked into that, maybe in terms of the series I did of single clay heads after the pandemic, I suppose. So it can really enforce kind of repetition. And I think there's some really, truly bad art that does really well on Instagram. But yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of absolute bullshit, but there's a lot of stuff. It's given a lot of artists who might not have had a good sort of forum. It's given them a bit of a forum. I think it's opened up spaces for types of artists who might have felt excluded for one reason or another. I think it's a bit more diverse culturally as well sometimes. So yeah, I think it's really complicated, and I think there's obviously a huge downside of it. It's maybe, I mean, the work I did with the big hand and the mobile phone is because I called it Obsidian Tomb. It's not all kind of happy and fun. It's a lot of social media stuff is friggin' awful, and I think it's taking us potentially into a sort of a pretty dark space in many ways, just in the sense of posting of disinformation, polarization, showing a hell of a lot of really bad art. But equally, I don't want to fall into. Because I teach an art school, and I think maybe it's sort of happening less now. But I think particularly when Instagram started to become more influential, there was a sense of snobbishness of like saying to students, "Hey, look, you don't want to look at Instagram for art." And I think that's not. I think we've got to get beyond that and deal with it in a sort of. You've just got to deal with it, and you've got to sort of take it seriously and not. I think it's not on to dismiss it. I mean, you just can't dismiss it. Well, we're on Instagram. When you started doing these performances, that world performance art was still quite niche. Yeah. And now when everything's recorded and it's suddenly put together in in it, you know, through social media, through Instagram, suddenly this new world of ephemeral art is now kind of given a permanence, and it's given an audience that it didn't have before. Do you remember starting to clock on to that sort of that tool that was now available for you? Yeah,
absolutely. It's my first video, Eating My Teeth, the single clay head. You're right. That was before that I made. That was about 2002, so before social media. So, but even then, it would get from when did Facebook start? I can't remember, but from quite early on, those were beginning to go kind of viral, even on like Twitter and So Facebook would have been about 2004, 2005. I'm not sure. Anyway, but so I never really actually started off doing live performances. It was always it's about the screen. And part of my interest is about the idea of this really primitive material and then matching it with a digital technology. So, and then the idea of clay doesn't change, but even since I started doing these in about 2000, like I've moved from like a kind of clunky camcorder with a separate cassette tape to steadily better quality of digital media to now 4K or whatever, and even now 4K is kind of behind the times, but it's that idea of I wanted to mediate the clay and the performance on a screen, so you sort of I don't know, you watched it like you would the sort of TV. So early on, back in about 2002, there was a Dutch TV channel called something like Boring TV, and then at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, the channel had a boring video. And I think it was sort of timed for people coming back from the bars and stuff, and maybe sitting at home thinking, what the hell is going on here? And then it was an hour of my video. And that's sometimes harder to reproduce in terms of a live performance. But I do a live performance, so a little bit like you and I sitting opposite, but in the middle there's a table and I've got a clay head and I make you an object, which is sort of which is kind of a portrait. So that's a kind of a live performance I do sort of a lot now, and I've sort of since done live performances at places like Hayward Gallery and Cafe Otto, and but that's come from the video. That's enabled me to do live things. But I think my home has always felt it has felt like I perform to a camera. I'm just always thinking of where's the camera? How's the camera going to catch this? So, yeah.
Anything else you'd like to add today?
I think considering that we're turning into icebergs, but it's been so much fun to talk to you. Great. So, I've really appreciated talking to you. So, I think we've covered a lot and hopefully it's not too boring.
The audience will decide. William, thank you. Despite what the rumours say, William Cobbing, very much alive, very much sat down here with us at Radio Juxtapoz, and you can follow all his action over on Instagram. We'll put all the links in the show notes for this episode. That's it from me, Doug Gillen, today. We'll be back with you guys all very, very soon. Till that moment comes, take care of yourselves and each other.